Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Esoteric Deathspiral.
Yeah!
Of music. And I'm your host, Ray the Offbeat Otaku, Ray the Eldritch Enby, Ray the Added Alliterative Appeal. And with me today, and every day, is Noisebandit.
Hello. This is probably the first actual, real content I've ever been in online. Other than, one thing I did for one... Yeah, so... Okay. So this is the Esoteric Music Deathspiral. This is our music podcast, and what this is that both me and Ray will listen to an album, and afterwards we will talk about our thoughts on it, what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it, and just sort of overall what we thought of it. And today, for our first episode, we are going to be doing the album Souvlaki by the band Slowdive. Okay.
An album which I'm probably going to get the V and the L reversed at least one point throughout this.
Yeah, Souvlaki.
Yeah.
So, a bit of backstory on this band. So the band Slowdive was formed in 1989 in England, and they were a dream pop shoegaze band that lasted for about 6 years, from 89 to 1995. In that time, they released 3 albums: Just for a Day in 91, Souvlaki in 93, and Pygmalion in 1995. And quite recently, in the past couple years, in 2014, they reunited, and just 2 years ago, in 2017, they released their 4th album, simply entitled Slowdive.
I was about
Now they have...
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was about to correct you and say that was 2017. It was only 1 year ago.
Well, no, because it's...
Yeah.
It's we're 5 days into New Year, so...
Yeah, I still am not used to that.
I mean, makes sense. So, yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the second album, Souvlaki. So...
Yeah.
So I've listened to this album plenty of times before, but you have just listened to it probably, in the past maybe day or two.
Yeah.
So do you want to, give your thoughts on it, or do you want me to go first?
Well, I think I'll go first, just because today was the first time that I ever listened to the album, and then I also watched the Pitchfork documentary about it, so I got to hear... I guess I've heard it 1.5 times. And so this album, this is... Okay, so Loveless by My Bloody Valentine is considered, not the first shoegaze album, but the shoegaze album that kind of, made it into a real genre that really established it. Kind of like almost Nevermind is for grunge. Although,
yeah, sure. There were artists beforehand that kind of had that style, but this is really sort of the first time that it really coalesced into a thing, rather than just a scene that people kind of sound similar but never really gave a name to.
Yeah.
With the grunge scene, like you said, there were plenty of bands beforehand. Let me think of there's one band that was, I forgot the name. But, for instance, Mudhoney, that band, or bands like Green River, bands that had that kind of style, but, they wouldn't have considered themselves grunge. Nirvana was really the first band that really, started that whole thing.
Yeah.
And much like with My Bloody Valentine with Loveless, bands had that kind of sound beforehand. In fact, sort of a term that existed before shoegaze, but kind of described the same scene was it the scene that celebrates itself, or something like that?
Yeah.
Where it was they knew they had a scene, but they kind of didn't really have a name for it until they had that name. And then the shoegaze thing came from the fact that, because of the fact that they were always pressing down on their effects pedals,
yeah,
they would gaze at their shoes, so shoegaze. Yeah.
Now, the reason that I bring up Loveless is 2 reasons. 1, it's my second favorite album of all time. 2, if you bring up Loveless, go on to any YouTube video about Loveless, and there will be people in the comment section that are Souvlaki. Souvlaki is better. Souvlaki is almost as good. Slowdive is as influential as MBV. They're better, they're worse. This is the biggest comparison point. Like,
Right.
I don't know if there's really even like a grunge equivalent to this album, except, I don't know, maybe like
Stone Temple Pilots?
Soundgarden.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because they kind of had, was it Bad Motorfinger? That album came out probably like the same year. Yeah, the same year, 1991. And I mean, I don't think they didn't get as popular until their next album, but I don't really think there is like sort of like an apt comparison now that I think about it.
Well, I mean, Soundgarden, they took some influence from Nirvana themselves, right? Because Slowdive has cited My Bloody Valentine as an influence.
Yeah, because they formed a couple years after My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, My Bloody Valentine was like, I think 87.
Actually, I think it was like 1983. Let me just check.
I think we're both off by 2 years. I think it's 85. I'll check to be sure. Let's get some of those good old.
I was right. It was 1983.
On the mic.
They formed in 1983.
Gosh darn it! I didn't even get a chance to get to the search bar.
You couldn't even prove me wrong. Yeah.
But so either way, here's the thing about this album here. I do not mean this as an insult, but I personally think that calling it shoegaze is like maybe not like unhelpful, but something along those lines. Because right now we have the terms shoegaze and we have the term dream pop, and we use them basically interchangeably.
When they're different, because I would describe dream pop as like a less distorted shoegaze.
Yeah, like
that focuses more on the ambience rather than just like the walls of sound that shoegaze does have.
Yeah, I'd say shoegaze is more about creating an atmosphere through like texture and distortion, whereas dream pop is more about like it's more about creating an atmosphere through like I don't just want to say reverb, but through like through just kind of the effects, really.
Yeah, and like there's sort of just like this feeling of just loftiness that like you do get with like artists like Slowdive that you don't really get with My Bloody Valentine, because My Bloody Valentine's more just like walls of sound making your brain like just go insane. Well, this is more like
yeah.
Maybe that's a bit of a hyperbole or hyper.
Well,
maybe it's
I mean,
too much, but
there have been people who have described My Bloody Valentine's music as a mermaid being sucked through a black hole. So I don't think that's too much hyperbole.
Yeah. Where'd that come from? I've heard that before. Was that like that one video where it's like Kevin Shields showing off his like 500 pedal like setup or something?
Yeah, it's not the one that he did with Fender. I think it was like a short interview he did with the BBC.
Yeah, that's what it was. So
somewhat infamously, that clip, it ends. The YouTube upload of it ends with like 5 seconds of them talking about some like trashy hair metal band. And and like a quarter of the comments are just like, and then they show us what MBV saved us from, or something like that.
Okay.
Now, I like to make this distinction, because with this album, basically as soon as I started hearing it, I was like, okay, this is not the same sound. Like,
yeah, no, you played me Loveless before, and I couldn't help but like sort of see a lot of difference between Loveless and Souvlaki.
Yeah. I just kind of assumed they were more alike than they were because they're so often compared.
Yeah. And I think definitely like I think we should probably preface this by saying that I recommended this album to Ray because it's one of my personal favorites. And largely, I think the first couple of albums that we are going to cover are sort of both their and my favorites that we're going to react basically to each. Like, she'll listen to an album that I have never heard. Wait, no, hold on. No, she'll listen to an album that I have never heard. Or wait, fuck. No, she'll listen to an album that she has never heard, but it's one of my favorites. And I'll listen to an album that's one of her favorites that I've never heard. There we go. Fuck.
Yeah. Usually on this show, it's going to be an album one of us is very familiar with, and one of us isn't so familiar with. Like, I'm thinking, keeping it consistent with the debatably shoegaze theme of this album, I was thinking we could talk about Silver Sun Pickups' first album next week, because that's one of my favorites. And another one that I'll briefly bring up, however, the main reason that I bring up these different sounds on an album like this, or Loveless, or even Carnivus, that Silver Sun Pickups album I mentioned, is because the sound is not my biggest criticism of this album. Honestly, I think my only criticism with the sound is I think the vocals might be a little bit too forward in the mix sometimes, but I'm realizing I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit because I think you wanted to give your impressions or history or something before that.
So I heard about this band through the Pitchfork documentary that you talked about, and I heard some of the sound on it, from what they heard, and it just I had never really heard anything like it. I'm not a big shoegaze fan, and I had never listened to Loveless before I listened to this album, so I never had a huge impression of what shoegaze was, or dream pop or whatever. So when I heard this, it just kind of sounded like something I never heard before. And this is also around the time when I was starting to get more into post-rock. I had been into it before, but this is around the time when I started sort of really sort of just listening to it heavily. And I wouldn't not consider this album post-rock, because it's not.
No.
Yeah, but I think just it has that kind of similar sort of slow, sort of very sort of heavy on, not necessarily dynamics, but just mood that a lot of post-rock has. And I think I just really like this album because it makes me feel very lofty, and I feel in my opinion, it uses its sound well to sort of build this kind of sort of dream-filled, wonderland feeling of just I am floating through bliss. And I feel it does that very well. Certain songs better than others, admittedly, but still, it's very enjoyable, and it gives this kind of feeling of just floating through clouds while a bunch of depressed British teenagers sing about their problems. Maybe not depressed, but certainly moody.
Well, in that documentary, they talk about how this album was kind of inspired by the two vocalists and guitarists for the band, Neil Halstead and Rachel Goswell, that they broke up.
Yeah, because they were dating before this album, and then they broke up. They still worked together after this. Yeah. So it's kind of inspired by that kind of sort of relationship breaking down between them.
Yeah, and there's also a little bit for the rest of the band. There's the fact that the previous album, Just for a Day, got really negative reviews. So there's this kind of gloom almost underlaying the bliss of this album. Yeah,
because it's ironic, because this is one of the bands that, when they first came out, nobody liked them. I think what they explained in the documentary was that the British press is sort of, this is cool, but let's move on to the next thing very quickly sort of vibe. And they were part of, the one thing that was cool in the, 89 through 90, and, once that ended, they stopped being cool, so everyone just shat on them. Pretty, not that... it wasn't that deserved, but now, they're seen as really great, despite all the negative press that they got back in the early 90s.
I think what happened, shoegaze was frankly unfairly dismissed, and most of the criticism of it was contrived bullshit. Because after MBV released Loveless, like the two big criticisms of Shoegaze were either A, this album isn't as good as Loveless, and there was like something I remember hearing like a British music journalist writing that was like, Shoegaze was an admittedly interesting genre, but none of them could live up to My Bloody Valentine's magnum opus or something. Which it's like, why would you shut down a genre for that reason? That's like saying there never should have been another pop album after, like, Bad or Thriller or Dangerous.
Or that there shouldn't have been, like, was it? I'm not trying to think of a good comparison. Like, there shouldn't have been another grunge album after Nevermind. And that kind of and actually, I'm on the Wikipedia page for Souvlaki right now, and yeah, so.
Well, and then the other thing was Britpop, and
that too.
Grunge, and critics were like, grunge and Britpop capture the struggles of the common man better, and it's like
it's not Blur, so I'm not gonna listen to it.
It's like, why would you define like what music should strive to in such a ridiculously confining box? Like, your music, like, I don't think shoegaze is like exclusively for like stuck up rich people. I think most of them are gonna listen to like a My Bloody Valentine song and be like, why is the guitar so loud?
Yeah, no. Where's the violin? Yeah. But anyway, so I was talking about the reviews.
Yeah.
So on the Souvlaki playlist, on the reception, there's Souvlaki initially had a mixed reception from critics, with some reviews bordering on ridicule. And here it is. Dave Simpson of Melody Maker wrote, "Sing aside, I would rather drown choking in a bath full of porridge than ever listen to it again."
That
and
he
like,
chose that he chose porridge
like,
specifically is the most British thing ever.
Yeah, no, a bath full of porridge.
Yeah.
It's like I think the equivalent to that, for like, I don't know, it's like the Australian equivalent would be like, drowning in a pool of snake venom while a koala skull fucks you.
The American equivalent would be drowning in apple pie and frying oil.
All right.
But anyway, we're getting a little off track.
Yeah.
So
anyway, so this album,
it's one of your favorites, and after listening to it, I think I would give it, like, okay, so Anthony Fantano does his, like, light, decent, strong thing. I think I would give it a decent 7.
Alright.
Originally, it was a light 7, but after watching the documentary, I was like, and specifically hearing some of the stronger snippets of these songs, where it's like, there's a few that I still think are kind of forgettable, and I generally have some criticisms for the album structure and some of the song structure. Like, so the first two tracks here, Allison and Machine Gun, I have the same problem with both of them, and that's that they end too soon, especially Machine Gun.
That's what I'm thinking too. Like, that's kind of one of my criticisms of this album, is that sometimes the songs kind of do feel like they go on too short. Like, especially with songs like Machine Gun or Allison, like, which is weird because they're like mid. I mean, like, I don't think this is like a special thing for shoegaze songs being super long. Maybe it is. I haven't listened to it on shoegaze, but like, these songs are about the average length of that songs usually are. Allison is 3 minutes 51. Machine Gun is 4:28. But the way the songs are kind of structured, they kind of do feel like they could be a lot longer, but they aren't, so it feels kind of weird and off-putting.
Well, see, I think the thing is, a lot of shoegaze that there's some that kind of goes more experimental with the song structure, like I mentioned Carnivus, and on that album you have a couple songs that are like 7 minutes long. Though even then, people debate and be like, "Oh, Silver Sun Pickups is indie rock. They're not shoegaze." And it's like, they became bland on their later albums, but that first album is cool and shoegaze. That's not to say all indie rock is bland. That's not what I meant.
No, and I just like I understand what you mean though. I've heard I've heard certain things about that band, Silver Sun Pickups, where like the first album was really good, but after that it's just like don't even bother.
The second album is still worth listening to, but it's a
Uh,
step down. But so Machine Gun in particular,
right.
that song, like right at the end of it, there's this like louder, more distorted guitar that starts coming in and playing like a pretty memorable melody, and it just feels like it gets cut off halfway. And I was like,
Huh.
no, why?
Yeah. I guess that's one thing though that is kind of weird is that some songs do feel like they kind of are structured bizarrely, not necessarily in a bad way, but like in a way where it's like it just kind of feels what's it unsatisfying sometimes. But I feel like
It does.
just like the way it kind of just, but also I think but I can deal with that because there's still good songs. Like there, it's not like so off-putting that you're just like I can't listen to this. It's just more like, huh, I would have liked more of that.
Yeah, there wasn't really anything that. I don't think there's anything that really took me out of the album. Like with these first couple songs, I did, I did actually say like under my breath while I was out walking because that's how I listened to this album. I
Yeah.
was just like, what? Why? Or what? No. But even then, I wouldn't say I was really taken out of it. More just kind of
Yeah.
like, huh? The only other huh moment like that, it
Yeah.
might be on Souvlaki Space Station, which is my
Yeah.
favorite song on the album, actually.
Actually, I'm gonna say mine too. I really like that song.
But there is one moment towards the end where
Yeah.
they take like two snare hits and they seemingly just like jacked
Oh
the volume
yeah.
up way
Yeah.
too much. I
I just
literally
spit all over my screen.
I literally did like a I'm trying to think of the right like person, but I did one of those like sitcom eyebrow raises at that.
Just like eyebrow raising to the ceiling or the sky or whatever.
Yeah, like
But
there would have
yeah,
been a laugh track.
yeah, it's the kind of thing that like you would expect more on like a weird experimental like jazz album, where just like
Yeah.
every other beat is just like a door slam or whatever.
Yeah. Actually, talking about the drums,
Yeah,
that's actually one criticism I have of this album. And this might sound hypocritical coming from someone who loves Loveless because aside from two songs, one of which is a minute-long interview, not
interlude.
interlude, all the songs on there just use like 4 bar like samples of the drummer
Yeah,
playing because
they
he
just
wasn't
loop it
available
over
to
and over again.
record. But like I feel like in that album itself, I feel like it still did a good job where like there was definitely like a cohesion to the drumming, but I feel like there were more songs where it would kind of break away and do something different. Whereas on this album, I feel like there was like exactly 2 modes of drumming, except for okay, like there were like 3 modes of drumming. There was like the mid tempo drumming, and then like the slow drumming, and like most of the songs that were in those 2 tempos had very similar sounding drum tracks. And then Souvlaki Space Station had like I think it had like a sampled beat, and that sounded pretty different.
Yeah, the weird kind of like echoey. Yeah,
Yeah,
like that thing.
that song almost had like 2 beats because there was like that, but then there was also like I could hear at times like the beat wasn't just doing that, that there was like kind of a breakbeat thing
Yeah.
going on. We'll get to that song eventually, but that is the
Yeah.
highlight of the album for me.
So are you done with your general thoughts, or you want to move on to the track by track?
Uh, the thing is, I don't have a lot to say about all the songs on here, so I'm kind of going more by like groupings of tracks. Like
Sure. That makes
Allison and Machine Gun for me are like those 2 tracks that end too early.
Yeah.
And then the next two, actually no, 40 Days is its own thing, and that
Yeah.
song is pretty cool. I like that
Yeah.
one quite a bit.
I personally like how it just kind of like it has that very kind of just like gloomy afternoon sitting on the beach while the wind passes by feeling. Especially after the vocal switch, where it's like the da na 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 da na 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 na, that kind of just sort of really drony guitar kind of
Yeah.
gives that feeling.
And I feel like that song and When the Sun Hits are the two songs that I'd say, unless I'm getting 40 Days mixed up with the next track, they're both like the poppiest songs on the album,
Yeah.
but in a very good way. I think that now I've heard their newest album criticized for being kind of too clean and too pop, but I think these two
Uh,
songs we'll get to that album in a different episode.
yeah, because I've listened to that new album too, and I can kind of see where you're coming from, but also I don't know that I think because that album definitely sort of did that new album kind of ditched a lot of the sort of the debatably shoegaze elements for a more kind of like indie poppy sound, but it's not bad. It's just kind of different.
Yeah,
And
but
we could go on about sort of the whole like different is bad criticism that I feel like is really dumb a lot of the time with because apparently people want their bands to stay the same forever. But different topic. But
either
I
way,
just wanted to say that.
yeah. Either way, what I'm trying to say basically is that on this album at least, I don't know about their later stuff, but on this album, I think that when this band goes full pop, they use it as a tool. See, I don't really want to listen to like a full pop album because I think it gets boring after a while and it's too
I,
obvious. But I think that pop itself is not a dirty word. I think it can be a tool. Like I think probably my favorite band is Coheed and Cambria, and
yeah,
they're a band that they have like a pop punk influence on like especially a
yeah.
lot of their earlier works,
I've heard
and
snippets of their songs, and I definitely do get that vibe.
like on the same album they'll have like a 9.5 minute song that like starts out is like an acoustic ballad and then becomes like a 2.5 minute solo with epic chanting over it at the end of it, and like a 3.5 minute like super catchy pop punk song, and like and I think that's cool. Like one thing that I kind of look for in an album is like an almost kind of narrative like flow to it, and
Yeah, I
and
think that's what
I think
I was gonna
that's
say. That's. I'm sorry.
and I think that by having songs that are like more cheery or more poppy, you can kind of add to that. You can add some of those euphoric highs.
Yeah, I think definitely like that's what makes because I listened when we listened to Loveless about like a month or two ago. I definitely got that feeling from like the first song because that first song for one thing had like an actual kind of sorry, that song actually had like an actual structure to it rather than just being 3 minutes of just like droning, which isn't bad. I just want to say that the first song had like a structure and kind of like a hook and sort of vocals that were a bit more accessible.
I
I
think
think
I think the fifth track, When You Sleep, and the final track, Soon, both have that a lot. I think
Is the
those
fifth track the
three.
one where it's like the acoustic guitar, where it's a bit more kind of not as drony? Or am I thinking of a
No,
different song?
that's the eighth track sometimes. The When You Sleep is the one that has the keyboard part that's like do 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 do
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
do
Okay.
do that
All right.
part. Um,
Okay.
10th track, What You Want, also is a lot more fun.
All
But
right.
okay, but speaking, we're getting into like whole album structure talk here. Um,
Yeah.
and I think I've mentioned most of the songs that I wanted to at this point.
Yeah.
Just kind of quickly rounding up. Um, Dagger, I like Dagger as a change of pace, but
Yeah, 'cause it's very different from the rest of the album. It's a lot. It's basically just like Neil and his acoustic guitar with like effects in the background.
yeah, and I like that. Um, okay, so there's this ad for something music related that I kept getting for a while on YouTube for like some
Yeah.
kind of like sound system or something, and they'd
Alright.
be like, jam out to your favorite tunes and dig into all the layers of that acoustic version or something like that. And when I heard that, I always thought it was funny because I was like, layers, acoustic version. There's like 2 layers to an acoustic song. This, I think, Dagger, even though like I would criticize like I think for an acoustic ballad, like it's not really doing much with that kind of formula, except just by like doubling the voice and doubling the guitar. I think you do have a lot of layers to it. It does feel like that.
So, I think definitely I want to bring up, since we're talking about the songs, so we've talked about most of the songs, but I want to sort of round up the ones we haven't. So first of all, there's Sing, the 4th track, and this one's interesting because Brian Eno co-wrote the song with the band. He provided some keyboards for it. And I think with this song, it kind of has that same vibe of more poppy, but kind of not. And also, because Brian Eno is also seen as like one of the pioneers of ambient. And you definitely have that kind of vibe on Sing, where it's very much more relaxed with a lot more layers to it, rather than like,
Yeah.
not.
They described it in the documentary as having a trip hop vibe to it, and I agreed with that. However, okay, so I mentioned earlier, so the first 2 songs I could group together. Yeah. This song, Sing, and then the one after it, Here She Comes.
Yeah, the short
those one. Those two, I feel like they should have been spaced out a little bit more, because I like both the songs on their own, but it's like the fact that you have like the 2 slowest songs on the album, except for Dagger, like put right next to each other, and like the one thing I will slightly criticize, I think the vocals on this album are all good, but I think there's a couple times where they start to sound a little samey, and I think Here She Comes is kind of a victim of that. Like, I don't think it's a bad song, but I think it might be the worst on the album because it ends so abruptly, and then the sound is kind of similar to the previous song, and the vocals are kind of similar to the ones before it. So it's like a little redundant.
I think it's the closest thing on this album that I could call it a filler. Like, it's short and it kind of just ends abruptly, doesn't really have a lot of... I think also this song is it's something I like to call musical blueballing, where basically like you'll have like a song, and maybe this is probably from more as sort of a problem with me because I'm a musician and I play a lot of music. You have sort of this thing when listening to music where you imagine what you want the chord progression to be, and when it's not that, you kind of just have this feeling of just like, oh, come on, it could have been this. And I think this is the perfect example of that, because there are a lot of times on the song where the progression, in my opinion, could have gone like a lot better, but instead it goes like a completely different direction, and you just have this feeling of just like, why didn't they go with this? And maybe this is a dumb criticism, because I'm basically just saying that, like, the way I could have written the song better thing, but like, you know what I mean, right? Where you're just like, you're listening to an album and then like you hear like a weird progression, and then you're just like, come on, that could have been better.
I think I know what you mean. Bringing up chord progressions. So in that documentary, there was one moment where I was like, oh no. And that's when they were talking about the production, and they said, I'm trying to find the name of the recording engineer / producer on this.
It doesn't say it on the page.
Ed Buller, that's the guy's name. He mentions at some point, like, I had to take some layers of the song out to make it sound better. And
wait, which song?
Just in general for the album.
Right.
And one thing that I would say about this album is, like, there's 3 people credited as doing guitars here in the personnel section.
Yeah, because they have 3 guitars. They have Neil, Rachel, and Christian Saville, who is actually left-handed, which is pretty cool because you don't get that a lot of the time.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like it. Like most of the time, I could only really hear like one guitar part.
Because I think a lot of it is like they'll use like one guitar for kind of just like the drony kind of just like you can't tell the chords, and they'll have like another one playing the lead melody, and then like the third one who plays sort of like a rhythm element sometimes. And I think you can kind of hear that on When the Sun Hits, where
Yeah.
Neil is playing like the sort of the chords, and like one guy's playing the harmonics, and then I think it's when the what's it called, when the chorus hits. That's when you hear all three guitars. Because you have the one going the da na 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 na, and
Yeah.
the other one kind of going like that kind of thing, and then like you have the third one. I don't exactly remember what it is, but
Yeah, that one
I
was the one where that one was kind of the one where it almost reminded me the most of something like what My Bloody Valentine would do, where they just like they layer on another guitar part that's like a bit more distorted, and you just really like feel it, and you're like,
yeah.
like
Also, it's probably the
eh,
most catchy song on the album, along with the next song, which I want to talk about, which is I think we've talked about it before, but it's Souvlaki Space Station, which is my favorite song on the album, and I think. Would you consider this one to be like the closest to shoegaze that this band actually ever gets on this album?
maybe, but before that, I just want to mention you had said the song like after this, and I thought you were gonna mention All Together in Melon Yellow,
Oh,
and I just
okay.
want to say I don't really remember much about those
Actually,
songs.
I'm gonna say like that's kind of these are like, in my opinion, the most forgettable songs on the album because they come between, the first like not the first, but like the seventh track When the Sun Hits, which is like this really sort of good pop filter song, and then Dagger, which is sort of the emotional, melancholic acoustic part, and then you just kind of have these two songs in the middle that kind of just like they're not filler, but they're like kind of forgettable, sort of just you know more dream poppy stuff. Like there's not a lot of it on these two songs that I would consider are very like very memorable or like in any way like stand out. They just kind of are there. Maybe to fill time, but they're not really the. I think definitely like with you, I mostly largely skip these two songs because I just kind of eh. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm gonna now I listened to this on Spotify, so there was an
yeah.
11th track on here. Um,
What was it called?
I'm opening up Spotify to
Oh,
find the name of it right
all right.
now. Um, and I'm actually gonna save this one for a bit later when I talk about the album structure.
Okay.
Because before we gush about Souvlaki Space Station, and
Yeah.
um, I do want to say that uh, like I was saying, I do really just want to applaud. Um, well, okay, I think my biggest like the thing that I like the most about the album is the
Yeah.
sound, because it really is that very like blissful kind of feeling from it.
Yeah.
Like I as much as I love My Bloody Valentine, I do think that Slowdive does that a bit better. There's only I think My Bloody Valentine has a little bit more variety of moods where like sometimes it's kind of drony, sometimes it's really upbeat, sometimes it's like you get a crushing low with sometimes.
Yeah.
This band the tone was a little more consistent, and I think that the sound that they used for that tone was pretty great.
Yeah. It has just like a, in the words of you know trash anime memes, it has a, it's a big mood. It's the
Yes.
largest mood, as large as some of their hairstyles. Because man, does this band have some weird hair, especially one of them who like had like a, you could kind of see it on the album cover. The guy on the far right kind of has like the weird kind of like bowler haircut, like mushroom head. I don't know. I always, that's just the one thing I always just like laugh at when I look at the covers. Just like the guy on the right who just like has that weird hair. But
Oh,
that's a bit of a
yeah.
tangent.
Oh, okay. So there is not an 11th track on Spotify. They just changed the numbering around. Altogether is the final track there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Because On Wikipedia, it's Allison, Machine Gun, 40 Days, Sing, Here She Comes, Souvlaki Space Station, When the Sun Hits, Altogether, Melon Yellow, and Dagger.
Yeah,
That's the order that I listen to.
yeah. On
I guess they...
Spotify, the default is everything the same except they just moved all together to the end, which I kind of understand why, because it has the crowd clapping along and such. Nice little Hey Jude thing there.
Huh. Interesting.
But I think probably my biggest criticism of the album will probably be the structure of it, because it feels off to me in a lot of ways. But first,
yeah.
Well, actually,
Souvlaki's... Wait.
Well, I'm trying to think of the order. If I want to just talk about the song first, or yeah, let's talk about the song first, and then I'll talk
Souvlaki
about
Space Station?
and then I'll talk about why I think it's placed in a bad place.
Alright, so Souvlaki Space Station, like we just said, was both of our favorite albums, and I think just what makes it so, I think, great to me is just it's like the most distorted, like, mind-melting, like, mess of a song on the entire album. And I say that with, like, entirely in a positive way. It's a mess in a good way because, like, this is... And they explain on the album how, like, this is the not the album, but the documentary where this is the one where they just cranked up the reverb and the effects on the album so hard.
Yeah.
You can hear that especially during the end where it's just like just giant like drums like, you know, crashing through, the guitars are all like going all over the place, there's like a heavy bass riff. It just like, this is the album that I imagine, you know, flying through the sky while, you know, air just blasting in your face and, you know, you're just like having just like the time of your life. And this is the song that I imagine this would be in, like you're just in like a giant white void with just sound echoing all around you.
I mean,
it has that vibe of just like absolute insanity, and it works really well.
They call it Souvlaki Space Station, and it really has like a spacey feel. Like you feel like you're in this vast space. Like you almost feel like you're not watching like a star explode near you, but you're seeing like it feels like you're watching a supernova from a distance. There's a comment on a YouTube upload of Sometimes from Loveless where someone said, "This song is about everything." And that's what Souvlaki Space Station feels like to me. That was the moment where it felt like, where it didn't just feel like the instrumentation was suiting the mood really well and was portraying the mood well, but was outright elevating the mood.
Yeah, it has this giant feeling that the rest of the album really doesn't capture. I think the one song that I think also kind of does it well is 40 Days, especially during the chorus, where after the vocals it kind of has that, you know, like I said before, the very kind of like not screechy but kind of like wailing guitar that kind of captures that melancholic mood. But this album kind of did that, but like all the time rather than just the chorus.
I think When the Sun Hits also kind of hits a big place, since it brings in the more distorted kind of growly guitars in the chorus there.
Yeah.
However, I have one criticism of this song.
It's placed right in the middle of the album.
Yes. This is clearly the climax of the album.
That's a good point. Like, you would think that this would be like, I don't think about it a lot of times, because like, it's the one song that you would imagine, like, you know, would be like the big, giant explosion of noise, but it's not. It's the kind of and I guess that's kind of a thing that I kind of find annoying, is when bands like end an album and not on like a giant thing, but just kind of with another generic song. And I mean, this album kind of does, not really, but like the fact that it has Dagger at the end, or at least on the version that I listen to, I think that's a good way to end an album, because like you have sort of the very melancholic mood, but like, you know, it also could have, Souvlaki Space Station also could have been a good ending to it. And I think, like, to put like a big song in the middle like that, like imagine if, for instance, you know, let's like say Mars Volta, for instance, imagine if they put like, you know, Take the Veil Serpent Taxed in like the middle of the album and had like, you know, I don't know, like Drunk Ship of Lanterns at the end. Or if it would feel really weird.
Or if they put like Tetragrammaton at the end, in the middle of Ambitexture.
Yeah, not like at the very beginning.
Yeah,
It would feel. Also, let's just say that's a preview for when we actually do go over every single Mars Volta album, which we will do.
yes.
Yeah, but
In general, this album, it kind of feels the structure, even with Dagger as the ending track. Dagger and Altogether, neither of them really feel like a good ending to me, because it's like, okay, so first you have Allison and Machine Gun, which are just kind of getting you into the more dreamy vibe.
yeah,
And then you have 40 Days, which is kind of bring in a little more energy to it.
yeah,
But then they kind of like immediately cut off the energy. Well, not
Sing.
with Sing and Here She Comes. And then it's like big explosion right away of energy with Souvlaki Space Station.
Yeah,
And then it's almost following up with When the Sun Hits. And then
yeah,
just the next three tracks are like either entirely cooling down or just or just like, you know, I feel like it, I guess it kind of makes sense if you look at it as almost like a big bell curve in its structure, where it's like it just kind of builds up to a high point and then goes
Kinda-
back down.
yeah,
But still, it just kind of felt for me like I feel like they should have maybe saved Souvlaki Space Station for the end. Like,
yeah.
maybe keep the first like three tracks the same. Maybe even keep like Sing or Here She Comes, or maybe like bring in Melon Yellow like in the middle there just to cool us
Yeah.
down a little bit more. And then maybe like I don't know. I'm kind of okay with Souvlaki Space Station and When the Sun Hits being right next to each other.
Yeah, like that. It could have maybe like when the sun. Maybe it could have been like first you have Dagger kind of, and then you have when the sun hits, and then Souvlaki Space Station. Like you have the mellow part, and then you kind of have when the sun hits building up with this sort of mellow opening, and then it explodes into noise, and then like after you have that kind of back and forth, you finally go into a Souvlaki Space Station, which is the giant explosion of noise, and then the album would end.
Yeah.
But that's not. Yeah.
Or I'd even be fine if like they had Souvlaki Space Station and then Dagger as like an epilogue song in a way.
Yeah.
Just
like that could have been interesting too.
But as it is now, it feels kind of weak because it's like you just have these two songs there that feel like kind of weak in comparison. And when I was listening to this, when Altogether came on as the last track, I kind of felt like this is kind of supposed to be like the resolution moment, like Soon was for Loveless, or like Common Reactor is for Carnivus. But like those songs are both like so much more strong in that emotion, whereas this one, it like I the way it felt to me when I listened to it this way was, it was like, okay, we have Dagger as like a really calm moment, and then we have Altogether kind of building us back up and hitting a little resolution. And I just felt like it wasn't, that was a pretty weird choice on Spotify's part to
I've never heard of that before, like that weird switch up of like the order of the songs. I've never heard that before. That's interesting.
Yeah,
And I feel like this is a better order, not the original order with Dagger at the end. That's like a much better order instead of just like having a weird. If I can bring up like another album, like that's kind of what I didn't like about at the Drive-In's most recent album, Inter Alia, because every single album beforehand, I mean not every single, but the last two at the Drive-In albums, In Casino Out and Relationship of Command, had songs that ended on high notes. Like for instance, In Casino Out had Transatlantic Foe, which is kind of this sort of quiet loud kind of song with a lot of powerful strumming, and then you had Non-Zero Possibility and Relationship of Command, which is this sort of big kind of sort of sprawling sort of ballad with these kind of powerful guitars that come in with these echoing guitars, and then just like during the verse is like this very kind of emotional thing. But we can save that for later once we talk about at the Drive-In. But like on the new album Inter Alia, it doesn't end on like a big explosion. It just ends on like another song. I believe the song is like, it's like a, was it let me just look it up right now. It's it ends on the song Hostage Stance, which isn't really like any kind of, unique big song. It's just kind of another song, but I know you have no idea what I'm talking about, but I just kind of wanted to say that with sort of albums that kind of end with the kind of, not really anything special, just another song.
Yeah,
Like
well,
that's always like a tone ruiner for me. Like when you expect like a big explosion of sound or like a really emotional ending, but you don't. You just get another song. And it
yeah,
kind of just doesn't feel like very um it doesn't feel very like it doesn't have a good payoff.
yeah. The way it is now, the original track listing, I think it's a better structure, but it still kind of feels like it's missing something to me. Where,
Yeah.
okay, I said I wasn't gonna compare the sound of Loveless in this album, but I will compare the structure because, okay, so when I listen to Loveless, it feels like a journey. Like Kevin Shields, the main guy
Yeah.
from My Buddy Valentine, who does vocals and guitar, has
Yeah.
described it as like going into another world.
More like
And
going into 17 studios.
well,
Yeah.
maybe that's the other world he was referring to.
Yeah.
Um,
The world of the 17 studios. It's like the My Bloody Valentine Yggdrasil.
exactly. But anyway,
Yeah.
so that's how he described the album, and it's like it's like you start off with a big burst of energy, and then you're kind of cooling things down, and then it's like the first three tracks almost feel like you're going into the world,
Yeah.
like Only Shallow is like you get launched into there, and then you land, and then the next two tracks are just kind of getting back on your feet, and then the next track, To Hear Knows When, is like you're exploring around and getting lost, and then When You
Yeah.
Sleep is this euphoric high, and then the next two tracks kind of calm things down a bit, and then you hit Sometimes, which again feels like it's about the universe. And
Yeah.
then we're kind of building back up, and then What You Want is a little bit is more energetic, the 10th track there, and then we are into Soon, which is like the most positive song on the album. It has like a dance groove to it, and
Yeah.
it feels like a really big resolution. Like, this feels like a rising and a falling narrative. It's not a concept album, but it feels like one.
Yeah, well, while Souvlaki kind of feels more like a sine wave. It just goes up and then goes down and then goes up and then down again,
Yeah,
and
it's just kind of like,
kind of rocky.
yeah, and I do wish there was a little bit more to it structurally. Like, to me, that's what would make this an amazing album, is it's like the component parts are all there for me. Like, I nitpick, like, some song structures could be better.
Yeah, no, it's
The
that's always
vocals
a
are a little too, like I said, I think the vocals are maybe a little bit too forward in the mix, because
yeah. I think
I feel like they
that
either
actually,
should have been moved further forward or pushed further back
I
for
think that's
me.
also what makes Souvlaki Space Station really great is that the vocals are near incomprehensible. You can't even like tell what
Yeah.
she's saying.
And that's also what
You
makes
just have this
Dagger
feeling of just
interesting.
someone like talking to you through like 10 telephones, where it's just like the like you just have this feeling of just like someone like screaming at you through like I don't know like a bunch of glass ornaments or whatever. I don't know. Like
You're getting a space transmission.
yeah,
And Dagger similarly is interesting because it's the clearest the vocals ever get. But
yeah.
like
'Cause that's
for
like the one
most of
song
the
where it's just
album,
like
it's like it's kind of like it's forward enough that every once in a while I can hear a phrase, like this one is from Dagger, but it just stuck out to me when I heard it.
yeah,
So I'll use this as an example. Like,
yeah.
the world is full of noises. I can hear them all, and I think to myself, what the fuck does that mean? because
I think
because I don't get the full context. But then
yeah.
like most of the time I can't quite make it out. Like,
So
and so
I
that
think
was a little bit of like a nitpick. Like, for me,
I
it's
guess
like the component parts are all there, but it's like it feels like those parts could have been rearranged to make it something
yeah.
more special than it was.
That's an interesting point, and I kind of wanted to bring up. This isn't necessarily like I wanted to sort of add sort of a little bit of like a this maybe like a if we're gonna talk about music this would be like a coda. But on the song Machine Gun, I always have this sort of very strong image in my mind of when I listen to that song. So you know how I guess we should probably preface this, like both me and Ray are big anime fans,
Yes.
and yeah, and so the thing is that you know how like I'm gonna ask this to Ray, but you know how like in certain sort of anime they'll have the scene where they're like walking through like the street when it's Christmas time, and you have like sort of the dark sort of you have like it's at night but there's like a lot of lights around and sort of decorations, and like they look up to the sky and it's like the dark and the snow's coming down. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I get this song, I get that vibe a lot with listening to the song, just like the way like you know the vocals are, and when the acoustic guitar comes in, I just get this feeling of like, you know, when Neil goes, "Sun is share, I saw it down." Like when I hear that, I just imagine just like someone looking up at the sky and snow slowly calling down on just like, you know, just like a busy street full of people when it's, you know, Christmas time.
Yeah.
So that's
with those first two songs, actually, first three really, it was kind of the perfect weather because I was walking around and I think, okay, if I were to describe like shoegaze and dream pop, I'm sure there would be some differences in terms of how I'd do this weather metaphor, but I I would kind of describe it as like, so it was a winter day, but it was kind of warm. It was in the 40s, and the sun was out. So it was like, it felt kind of like barren. It was like, it felt kind of happy on the surface, but there was also this kind of underlying like emptiness and gloom to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I describe both genres.
That I mean, I get what you're talking about, it, especially since I live up, you know, in the Northwest. There's a lot of rain, and it you get this kind of gloomy feeling sometimes where you're surrounded by trees, but it's also rainy, so you just kind of end up walking around like a very hilly, rainy, wet forest with houses everywhere.
You can get those sad boy vibes going.
But yeah, so yeah, I believe that's all our thoughts. Do you have anything like any other like last things you want to say?
Yes, I keep saying shoegaze, dream pop. I do want to say though, they mentioned in the documentary, you know, that particularly the three songs in the middle there, "Sing," "Here She Comes," and "Souvlaki Space Station," all those songs kind of have like a bit of a dub ambient influence to them, and I thought that was really cool to hear on this kind of album. And like that's one thing I'll give this band is when My Bloody Valentine finally made that third album like 20 years later, that album has 9 songs on it. The first 3 are like, you know, rock tracks like they usually make, and then the next 3 songs are like kind of experimental electronic songs, and then the 3 after that are like a weird combination of the two. That album's, even that album, you would probably listen to it and be like, what am I supposed to feel? Because it's even like, weirder than Loveless. But
man, yeah, that's kind of, I bet that's kind of the same vibe that a lot of people got with listening to Nocturnica by the Mars Volta, because it's just like, you've never listened to it, but I have, but it definitely does sound a lot different. But again, we'll get into that when we actually like do listen to it.
Yeah, that album's a lot more electronic, but just I like that on that album by MBV, or on this album by Slowdive, that these like shoegaze and dream pop bands, I like it when they're just fully willing to embrace the fact that they're making, in a way they are making electronic music. Like shoegaze and dream pop are very electronic and studio driven genres. They're all about the effects
you
pedals
need all
and the
that
electric
reverb
guitars.
Just layering over yourself.
Yeah. You can't like layer your voice and your guitar both like 3 times when you're live.
Yeah. And I feel like, I'm going to say this, I actually saw Slowdive live back in 2017 when they played in Seattle, and I would have to say it was a cool show, and I really did enjoy it. And the thing is that I think this is just kind of this is probably just like an issue with live bands in general, of not being able to sort of capture the same energy that you can have in a studio, where you can just like do whatever you want. When you're live, you have a lot of caveats that you have, not caveats, but like exceptions that you have to make. Yeah. And like it did kind of feel that way. sometimes you have the reverse issue where like you feel like you can't capture the energy on like a studio album. Like At the Drive-In frequently talked about how they felt like they couldn't get their energy onto their albums.
I've heard a lot of
Which is
people describe Coheed that way. I think eventually they got a bit better about kind of merging the two, because when they around the late 2000s they were touring and they had a keyboardist when they toured, but they didn't in the studio. But eventually, on their Afterman double album, they were integrating some more electronic stuff there, and so I think they sounded pretty close to how they did live on that album. But
Yeah,
we
I
can
was
get
gonna
more
say-
into that when we inevitably talk about Coheed, because I will force you to listen to most of their albums.
Yeah, once I but yeah, I was gonna say the reason why with the Drive-In, that's why they recorded their Striking album in Casino out live. They actually did not do overdubs. They actually like got all the members in a room and had them play the song just there, and that's how they recorded the entire album. And I feel that they said that's kind of partially why they wanted that kind of that live raw sound that they just couldn't get before, which shows if you listen to their first album, which is it's not that great, but again, we'll get there when we get there. So I think now we've got we've said all we wanted to say, right?
Yeah, just kind of wrapping up. I think I'll just say, while I don't think this album lives up to the hype, like I said, I still have a positive impression of this album and this band.
Yeah.
Like, I think they incorporate some pretty disparate influences into their sound sometimes, and I think, like, okay, there's a friend of the show who will probably be on the show at one point, but who shall remain nameless for the moment because their opinion's going to make you really mad. And because they told me after they listened to this album, they were like, "Hey Ray, so you know how people say that My Bloody Valentine's Loveless is just top 40 radio rock, but with the guitars way too loud?" And I was no, with the guitars soaked in reverb, and I was like, yeah, and they were like, that's what this album actually is. And I was like, I hope you're wrong. To which I'd say there are 3/4 wrong. This album, I think it is pretty, like, it's definitely more poppy than a decent amount of shoegaze.
I think that's, in my opinion, that's kind of what I like about it, because I've always kind of had a bit of like a hesitation about listening to shoegaze, because I feel like it'll just be like way too much.
Yeah, I feel like if you wanted to get someone in,
and that's coming from someone who, Superheroes of BMX by Mogwai is one of their favorites. It's one of my favorite songs by them, but again, get there when we get there, because I don't think you've listened to a lot of Mogwai.
Yeah, I think if you were gonna get someone into shoegaze and dream pop, the two albums you should start them with are Souvlaki and like Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins. And maybe Carnivus by Silver Sun Pickups, because all three of them people debate. They'll be like, that's not real shoegaze, and it's stop.
Because I think you told me about the you told me about the Slowdive opinion by our friend. So
I did. Okay.
Yeah, you already told me that. I didn't remember exactly what it was, but I know you told me what it was and how they didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
But, yeah. All right. I think that's it.
Yeah.
This has been the Esoteric Music Deathspiral. Join us next time when we apparently listen to the new Silver Sun Pickups
the old
album.
Silver Sun Pickups album.
Yeah, the old one.
I hope we're not listening to the new one.
Because I've heard that one's not that good.
No.
All right. This is Noisebandit signing off.
And this is Ray, the insert alliterative name here. Goodbye. Goodbye.